Welcome to Actionable Impact, rebuilding communications for the AI era. And today we're joined by a legend in the field, who I'm sure most of you know very well, my friend Robert Gibbs, who is currently the Chief Communications and Public Affairs Officer at Warner Brothers Discovery. Welcome, Robert.
Andrew, thank you. We can quarrel about legend. I don't know whether that makes me sound old or if
Wonderkind,
it's,
Wonderkind, next generation legend.
I don't know about any of that, but I'm excited to have this conversation.
Thank you. Well, let's look back for a second before we go forward. Before we get into a ton about AI and a ton about obviously this huge transaction that you've been at the helm of for the last year here that the whole world is focused on. But let's just go back. You've been in the White House podium. You ran corporate affairs at McDonald's. Now at Warner Brothers Discovery. Brief stint at a great little firm called BPI. One of the things that to me is a real through line in this whole story is speed. And I wonder if you could just reflect for a second on the speed of communications and even in the White House when what you thought was a crisis in time versus today.
Oh, it's a great question, and I've had conversations with people that were in the previous White House about this, which you won't be surprised at. I used to on the first presidential campaign in 2008, I had the dial-in number for the nightly newscast on NBC. So I could dial this number and hear the audio of
Amazing.
that. And I still use that as like, okay, where does this rank in important? Like, okay, what are people focused on? Because, and to your point, I'm at the podium of the White House. When I started to go in there, I was thinking through how this had evolved. And I talked to old press secretaries, Marlon Fitzwater, who was Reagan and Bush's press secretary. When Marlon would walk into that room, 50 million people would watch the nightly news, right? If his boss, the president, walked into that room, 50 million people would get that information. When I was in the White House, that number was already down to a little bit, probably around, right around 20 million. That number's even lower today. And so this notion of, we're getting it from thousands of different places now. It's happening much faster. You don't even have to be a reporter to be a newscaster, right?
Well,
And
so if we
so
don't have a news cycle, what do we have?
thousands and thousands of mini ones. And we now realize that we could have a news cycle that lasts not 4 hours or not 4 days, but 40 minutes,
Well,
you
and this
know?
is a good transition into AI and the technology, and because you've had to run some of the biggest and most sophisticated communications and public affairs operations, how do you tell the smoke from the fire in that when they're constantly coming at you?
Yeah. I think that's the hardest thing because I think it gets harder sometimes to define your universe every day, right? To your point, you can look at information and what's driving things and how are we into and evolving in this notion of an attention economy and what's grabbing people's attention and share of mind, share of voice, share of culture, all of those things. It gets harder and harder. I think for a communications leader and for teams, it's really important to understand who are you trying to influence? Who are you trying to reach? Because you could spend a lot of time either monitoring a group or an area that's not that important to you versus a group that is probably much smaller and much more focused on you getting your information to, whether that's a direct source like a reporter or whether you're talking to influencers or whatnot.
Well, one of those small groups I know is investors, right? And I know
Absolutely.
one is not just does the news cycle not sleep, but the markets don't sleep anymore. And so, can you talk about balancing news coming faster than can move markets?
Yes. So I'm on the West Coast most of the time working now. And during the midst of this deal, the reality was I was getting up at 3 in the morning because I would sit down. Thankfully, I wasn't going into the office at 3 in the morning, but I would sit down in front of a television and watch CNBC starting at 3 in the morning Pacific because it was 6 in the morning on the East Coast. And you're starting to watch like, okay, Andrew Ross Sorkin, these guys are going like, it all transitions, Faber, all of that stuff. And so it's happening at light speed. And to your point, like it never sleeps. Maybe the most haunting thing during the deal on my phone was it's that noise that when my phone makes when you get a push notification from CNBC. And I'm telling you, more times than not, I would be sitting there and have my phone on the counter, working, drinking coffee, watching this at 3:30 in the morning. And I hear that and I'm like, God, I bet that's about us. And, you know, all of a sudden you're thinking through and you're scurrying around it. And it to your point, you can't, I mean, it's probably a good example of you can't sleep or you don't get an opportunity to sleep because again, that news cycle doesn't go to bed from midnight until 8 a.m. and then you punch up the digest from your computer and figure out what the top stories are. It's just it's constant. Um, and it requires having a team that has those tools and the ability to analyze that information, you know, on a 24-hour basis.
Definitely. Well, you mentioned Andrew Ross Sorkin. Obviously, you're working for a CEO in David Zaslav that is also a brand name in the way that Andrew Sorkin is a brand name. How do you think about the role of individuals and building a personal brand versus the brand itself, whether for a reporter or for a CEO?
You know, I think in some ways, depending on who they are, I think it's very hard to divorce the company and the person, right? And I think, quite frankly, I think that the successful people don't try to do that, right? You got to understand the values, you got to understand the points you're trying to communicate, the messages you're trying to deliver. And I think if you get off of trying to do that for some larger thing, some larger, it could be a business, an enterprise, a foundation, or whatever, you got to, you have to always be true, I think, to that.
What is from a communication standpoint, what is one thing you learned at the end of this process that you didn't know at the beginning?
God, I mean, I learned a lot. I mean, it was fascinating to have sat there and to have been in all these meetings and I mean, I guess it reemphasized to me how fast everything's moving and how quickly you've got to be ready for anything at any moment. And you have to have a really good team and a good group of advisors around you that allow you to navigate that.
Well, and what does a good team look like today, right? Is it
Yeah.
more technical? Is it more judgment?
It's all of the above. I think that the challenge is if I was telling this to somebody, I wouldn't say like there's one skill you need. I think there's a lot. I mean, as we get into this AI conversation, I think how to me, and you've probably heard me preach on this, like the only thing you can't get more of is time, right? So if I'm using AI, maybe this is a good segue for us. If I'm trying to use AI in a way that's helpful for me, what are the things that I have on my to-do list every day that I can help automate or help just go a lot faster that don't take my time and my kind of brain power as limited as it is, but doesn't take that to I need to focus on the higher order magnitude of my to-do list than the lower order, right? And I
And
think
what's an
that's true
example of
for every member of your team, right?
so what's an example for you? Is there one thing that you've really come to in your life depend on AI for?
I think there's a series of things, and I'll be honest with you, Andrew. I there isn't a day that I don't think I'm not using it enough, and I want desperately, and I know we'll probably talk about this, like to think through how to use it more. I think it started out as sort of what's a blank page problem, right? How can it help me start to think through talking about or writing something? I think it's really good for summarizing, you know, long, big documents and then using that to help you synthesize and write shorter documents so that all of a sudden that information now can be pushed out at scale in a way that would take many, many people and multiple time periods. I think summarizing, you know, sentiment analysis and listening is important. But I think more than anything, to me, I felt like, and I think this is important for, I think everybody that touches or thinks about AI, think about it as something that adds, not subtracts, right? And so if I'm sitting here, how do I create four different or five different sets of hands instead of just one set? And if each of my team members can think about it like that, all of a sudden a 500 person global team becomes the power of 2,500, right? So I'm not thinking, well, oh, okay, how do I get rid of 100 of them? I'm thinking now, how do we take the lower order stuff and give yourself time to do more of the higher order, higher magnitude things? Because Andrew, you also know this about me. I'm going to be a communications gut person, right? I'm going to take in a lot of information, but at the end of this, I'm going to trust my gut to make decisions. I think that's another important lesson around AI. This is not I'm not going to type in a question. It's not going to give me an answer, and I'm just going to hit send, right? I'm going to use it as a milepost to make a decision. Um, and I think that's important for younger employees to understand. Like, this is, I think it's wrong to approach this simply as this is going to replace me. I think it's important to embrace where we are and use the moment to understand how I don't want this to shape me. I want to shape it. How do I use it to be better at what I do? So again, I've got more time to do the things that my leader is going to think are more impactful and show how I can use this in a way that helps the entire enterprise, whatever it is, be more impactful.
I love that. So let's turn a little to a little buzzword bingo and play a little buzzword
All
bingo
right.
here. Maybe first, just give us your quick reactions to these synthetic data, like synthetic focus groups, synthetic polling.
Fascinated by it and really interested to see where it goes and how it progresses. Because again, you know this about me, Andrew. I love data and I love using that data to make sharp decisions. And if it's even closer and at your fingertips in a way that's does this not in days or hours, but in minutes, it's going to be a fantastic thing. I'm just dying to see how it.
How about GEO or optimizing how you show up in these LLMs?
I think this is the most important thing for communicators. And I was reading an interesting article about how you'll relate to this, how political campaigns going into 2026 are not thinking about or don't really have a plan or a playbook for how this is happening. In a world in which half of us are now typing something into one of these services and asking about a candidate and asking about news and information. And you know, our worlds are planned around how do you get a plan to deal with what's coming at you. It's clearly a big thing. It's clearly something that's going to happen. And it feels like we're not as far or ready to deal with that as far advanced as we need to be. And it's crucial
How about
because again,
story?
I'm like, I'm a search person and I'm going to type something in and I'm going to get 6 different answers and I'm going to pair them and pressure test them. In a world now where we're dealing with, you're not putting those pieces together to get the long answer, you're getting one answer. And that model is going to determine what data goes into providing that one answer. And if you're not in there the way you want to be in there, you're toast.
No question. How about storytelling? So much of the Warner Brothers business is storytelling, right?
Yeah. Well, I would say this, it's that's interesting. I will say for any creative community, as much as I think AI can do, and I heard one of our leaders say this at a town hall we did last year. I hope many people saw the movie Sinners. If you didn't see the movie Sinners, go see it. But as somebody said, as fantastic as AI is, they could never have written Sinners. They couldn't have. And I, for one, as somebody who works in that creative industry, am glad and hope we don't get to that point. Storytelling is a unique device that, maybe, and again, people are using AI for lots of different things. I know reporters are using it for story outlines and things like that. But I think to me, again, storytelling is a little bit of that higher order thing that I want to spend my time thinking through and use my experience and brain power to try.
Let's talk about earned media for a second. A lot of people are saying earned media is more important in a world of LLMs, but talk about, do the most important reporters matter more? Do the trades matter more? How have you thought about just where your team spends their time?
A great question. I mean, and I think it goes back to that LLM question. It goes back to sort of how's the data going into what gives you that answer. I will say, I think it's more important than ever to dive into that, to earn media. It's more important than ever to make sure that earned media gets it right. We've all been in organizations where somebody says, "Oh, well, that's not really true and it wasn't really true, but we didn't really correct it. We didn't really think through it." And now it's who you are, right? So I think I'm glad to know that it's important, and I think that it, like you said, is more important than ever. But I also think it puts an onus on everybody involved in that to really dig in and get it right.
How about dealing with disinformation in an AI era?
Scary. I mean, it is, and my guess is every communicator spends some percentage of their day working through exactly that. And in different businesses and in different enterprises, it may be a significant amount of that. Again, to me, the notion of LLMs and how they're figuring out that stuff and disinformation just means that you control your story, your content, its scale, its velocity, its quantity. And what it means, I think, more than ever for communicators is the onus is on you to be active in that space, right? The world either shapes you or you shape it. And that's never been more true now. And you can stick your head in the sand and hope things get better. Hope's not a strategy. It's a great slogan. It's a terrible strategy. You got to get in there and shape this outcome, because if the outcome shapes you, it's entirely likely you won't like the outcome.
Hope is a great slogan. Let's talk about adoption for a minute, right? You have run big global teams, right? Both in communications and in corporate affairs, government affairs. What's your sense of where the communication space is today? Are they excited to adopt these tools? Are they afraid of these tools? And is that different? Are you seeing that different in between fields, like between government affairs or corporate affairs?
I think if you look at, we're great news consumers, right? So the headlines can be daunting, right? Just candidly. And what I'm thinking of is predictions of job loss and things like that. And it's natural to think, is this going to be us? Is this going to be me? So I think there's great trepidation about the unknown. I would say the best thing to do is jump in and use it, and jump in and get familiar with it. Use it in a way that helps you. I think, look, don't be afraid of it, because I can't think of anything, Andrew, thus far that I've navigated in 3 decades of doing this, that's going to be more impactful than what we're seeing with AI, right? And it means you can't run away from it. You've got to figure out how to embrace it and how to make it work for you. And I'll give you an example. Maybe I'm a little bit um, in the kind of Mark Benioff school of this. And, he's, obviously built a fabulous company, and it's challenged right now because people are saying like, well, what am I going to need you? Because,
Yeah, the SaaS apocalypse.
right. So I don't need you. I'm going to hire I'm going to subscribe to this, and I don't need to hire anybody. I can get rid of all this. And his theory is there's never been a better opportunity for his business, because the way AI is used is going to be shaped by really smart people using it, right? This technology is going to get better, Andrew, but it's never going to be perfect, right? I love the notion of, hallucinations, right? It means this stuff's never going to get perfect. And so if I'm in starting out in communications, or if I'm 55 and I'm in communications, I think diving into this, because to me, you're still going to need somebody who's smart, strategic, curious, thoughtful, and has the experience to make the decisions and guide this technology to help you. I do not think we're going to just wake up one day and all our jobs are going to disappear because a computer can do that all for us. Because it's not perfect, and because the best that you get out of this is what somebody puts into it, means that that person, if they do this the right way, if they learn it and they don't shy away from it, I think has a really good opportunity to use it as a second, third, or fourth set of hands.
Are you seeing some of the best innovations, like practical innovations on your teams, come sort of bottom up or top down?
I think, I mean, look, it's always going to be bottom up. All right. It's in lots of different things, largely because, I'm still telling stories, Andrew, about the nightly news. People are like, what's the nightly news? They're getting, they're in many more spaces. And so I think that's the great thing to me about this technology too, is I don't think you're at a disadvantage if you're young and inexperienced, right? Because in a beautiful way, you're not tied to thinking about how you do your job only one way. And so I can learn something from them, they can learn something from me. And I think the best teams and the best leaders are encouraging all of their people, really from at the highest levels and at the very lowest levels of your organization, to embrace and be comfortable with this, and to find a way to make it a benefit and an add rather than something that is a subtraction or something that's bad.
And how about regional differences? As you and David travel around the world, your teams, regulators around the world, is there different levels of interest, anxiety,
Yeah,
adoption?
yeah, absolutely. I think there's and I think this is going to be something to really watch. I think how this is adopted, what are the rules around it, what feels permissible and okay, what doesn't, what are the ethical use cases, what are the edge cases, what are all of those things that I think are going to be important. Look, I think how governments deal with the regulation of and may result in AI. I will say this too. I mean, I I really impressed with the way Anthropic dealt with their recent, to some degree, non-release of their new product, right? That morning I was struck by the news articles. I read a bunch of them. I went to their website. They had this great, like, the website had been totally redone around just this announcement.
Yeah, cybersecurity.
Yeah, just this announcement around not releasing the product because of the worries around what it would do, but then creating a coalition of like-minded companies that were gonna do this. They had a great video of leaders talking about this. I was on the New York Times that day. Tom Friedman, we're all supposed to be worried about and should be worried about what's going on in Iran and the Middle East. His column is about this, is about Anthropic's decision. And so it gives you that sense of just really how important it is and really how big it is in the world. And look, you read some of the stuff and some of the stuff's really scary. And I
What
think
keeps you up at night about AI? What's your biggest fear?
the fear of, honestly, literally that, waking up and realizing that we've made these huge leaps and we now can't control some of it. I will say I was in Silicon Valley in San Francisco a few months ago and for a set of meetings, and even talking to tech leaders out there, they'd said this is probably February-ish and February, early March, and they said basically, like, look, even for us, this whole suite of tools has changed dramatically in just the last 3 months, right? And then you started reading these articles of, like, oh, this project, this coding project that took 3 weeks is now taking 30 minutes. And you start reading, a law firm, a managing partner is using AI a lot. And then you start thinking, uh-oh, like, I got to get sharper. I got to get more interested in this. I've started putting time on my schedule a couple of times, 3 times a week, just to block off I call it AI time. How do I learn more? How do I experiment more? How do I read
How
more?
do you stay current? Do you follow certain people on social? Are you playing with it? What works?
I think following them on social, following the just news coverage of it, asking around, asking other communications leaders, asking your team, how are you using it? What do you find interesting? And then I think you can read, I think you can do all those things. I think the best thing to do is to just hop. It's like riding a bike. I can describe what riding a bike is like, but you got to get on the bike. And I think learning how to use it, because it takes a little bit, and it's not a search engine plus, it's way, way beyond that. And so getting just involved and immersed in it a bit and understanding you just have to make it more and more of how you do things. I now start to think of, and what I'm doing right now, not this podcast, but and what I'm doing right now, could it be doing it better by using AI to do?
Do you have a dream product for communicators? Like is there one problem or one feature that you are hoping AI can solve for us?
I think you brought it up a little bit earlier. I mean, I think figuring out how I mean, I think out signal and noise, figuring out smoke and fire, sentiment and listening is I'm anxious to see how far that can go. To your point on synthetic data, I'm really excited to see how far that can go, because you imagine the power of more actual actionable data combined with the understanding of how to measure and see your impact, like that together would be a dream, I think, for communicators.
Well, and you other than just getting into the space and using it, is there any advice that you would give, your son or kids coming out of school today?
Well, look, embrace this, because in your professional career, you're going to have to learn constantly, right? I used to tell people you need to be a good writer. You still do, but AI can help you. Be curious. Embrace embrace the idea, and this is true for a young professional. Your professional life is going to, whatever you decide to do, is going to be disrupted at many different points. Embrace that disruption. Get more comfortable, be extraordinarily comfortable in being uncomfortable. And that will then help you not look to run away from, but look to work and solve that problem. And again, as I said, remember this, the tech's not going to ever get perfect. It may get better and better and better and better. It is still going to need someone really smart sitting on the other side of the keyboard helping it. And you can be the person that helps it.
Well, Robert, congratulations on the deal. An amazing success story of communications and business. And thanks for being here on Actionable Impact.
Thanks, Andrew.